the Pollinators event with the Canadian Wildlife Federation. My name is Sarah Flynn, and I'm from the Centre for Global Education here in Edmonton, Alberta. And we're so happy to help host this event with our colleagues at the Canadian Wildlife Federation. The education specialist, Sarah Colbert, is here to join us today from Ottawa, and I'm joining you from Edmonton, Alberta. And we want to welcome all of you for joining us today for this great conversation. I welcome questions and comments as we're going on. For those who are joining us live streaming on YouTube, you're welcome to enter them into the chat. We'd love to hear your names, where you're joining us from, and anything from the conversation today that strikes an interest in you. Please put down your questions, and we will get them here into the live meeting with Sarah for your answers. For those who are in the Zoom meeting with us, welcome. We'd love to hear your questions as well, so write them in the chat, raise your hand, and we will get to you soon. So Sarah, thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to introduce you to our participants and hear about the pollinators in Canada today and how we build our gardens to welcome them in and help them grow our wonderful gardens.
Yeah, I'm Sarah. I'm sorry, before we jump across, hi guys, my name is Terry. I'm just monitoring the web chat in the background, and I think we need to restart the YouTube link because something is up on the audio side. So if we can stop that streaming and restart it, that would be great, and then we'll, so sorry about that. Oh, technology. And that will be good.
We're just, our technician in the background here is currently trying to adjust the audio. All right. Testy test. All right. That's okay. We have more people coming in to welcome.
That is weird.
So welcome everyone. We are just getting some technical stuff worked out on the background. We're going to give it another few seconds, and then we can always just restart.
But welcome if you've just joined. You'll notice that everyone in the room has been renaming themselves with where they're from, and or the names they'd like to be known as, comma, where they're from. So I'm Sarah, and I'm in Edmonton. Our host today, who's also Sarah, is from near Ottawa, and then we have lots of other speakers. So in order to join, or in order to do that, you go to the participants, and then you hover over your name, and it'll say rename, and you can just type in. If you don't understand, you're welcome to send me a message. Now, I see other people have also found about our question area. If you would like to ask a question here or on the live stream on YouTube, please, I know we've typed instructions now. If you'd like to ask a question, type them here in the chat. You can raise your hand. You can also type them on the live stream. They've just restarted the live stream. Sounds like it's good to go. Everyone can hear us. It's a win. It's a win for technology today. So welcome again to everyone. I want to introduce Sarah Colbert, our education specialist with the Canadian Wildlife Federation, who's joining us today to tell us all about pollinators. Sarah, I welcome you to start again.
Great, thank you. Well, it's lovely to be here, and it's great that there's so many of you here joining us. It's a great topic. It's a really important and timely topic. So I'll just share my screen, and then we can get started. Okay, so gardening for pollinators. And as you can see from this first screen, it's all kinds of pollinators, and I look forward to telling you about a variety of them. So we'll go over the benefits, first of all, and components of pollinator gardening, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the pollinators we're actually helping and a little bit about them, and then some resources to help you along your way. First, a bit about the Canadian Wildlife Federation. We've been around since the 60s. We're a national charitable organization. We do a variety of things. We do our own research. We work with policymakers to shape healthy policies for wildlife, but we also do a lot of education so that whether you're a school child or you're a homeowner or anyone, you discover and appreciate the amazing wildlife that we have right outside our door and in all across the country, and find ways to support it as best as you're comfortable doing. So this is now the great way that I love doing it is gardening. It's something a lot of us do, and it's a really fantastic opportunity to help wildlife. It's helping your local wildlife, your migratory wildlife with creating habitat and maintaining the space in a safe way. And that's really important because our gardening activities are now known, even by leading researchers and conservationists, that our gardening activities are choices that we make. They're affecting not just our gardens, not just our communities, but the world at large, and therefore the wildlife within it. We're creating corridors and safe spaces for a myriad of animals that really rely on us because we've taken so much habitat away, we have the chance to put it back. In fact, Doug Tallamy, he's a leading researcher, author, head of an American University's Entomology and Wildlife Ecology Department. In his first book, he says, gardeners have become important players in the management of our nation's wildlife. It is now within the power of individual gardeners to do something that we all dream of doing, to make a difference. And in his latest book, Nature's Best Hope, he even goes further by saying, it really, gardeners, we're where it's at. So I'm really excited that you guys are here to join us. So Pollinator Gardens specifically, I'm just going to go over the basics because it's amazing how we can take some of that for granted. Pollination is basically transferring pollen from one flower to another. The pollen gets stuck to the animal's body, and as it moves around getting its food, it moves the pollen around, and that's what helps these plants to get pollinated. Pollinator gardens can be anything. It can be a very tiny little patio with a few containers on it, a few pots. It can be a large acreage. It can be a very small suburban garden. On the bottom right, you see a couple of chairs and a little table. That's from one of our certified properties. They have a tiny little condo space with a lot of restrictions, and they still have managed to have a wildlife-friendly garden with lots of pollinators living and visiting on their property. And then at the bottom, you see a public garden created by a horticultural society. A couple more examples. Pollinator gardens can be anything you want. They can be highly landscaped, incredibly manicured, or it can be a very simple corner garden with just a few of your favorite plants. The trick is to include habitat for them, food, water, shelter, for all stages of their development. And Monarch is a great example of that. So the benefits of a pollinator garden, just very briefly, I mean, gardening is really good for our mental, emotional, physical health. The practices make it safe for animals as well as ourselves. It's very satisfying doing our part to help, and it can create beautiful visual interest with all the plants that we're adding. And the wildlife, of course, are wonderful to watch. But in particular, pollinators, of course, are very important for our food supply. It's estimated they contribute well over $1 billion annually to the Canadian economy, and help keep our ecosystems healthy by maintaining a diversity of plants, which we really need, as the web of life is composed of a myriad of animals. And if you lose the biodiversity of the plants, you lose the biodiversity of the animals and their services and all their roles that they play. And some animals, some of the pollinators, actually help with pest control. You can see a picture there of a solitary wasp, and I'll get into that later. They're very safe. They actually get a lot of the insects that, if they were left unchecked, could potentially be a problem. So it's great for the agricultural industry, great for us too. So how do we actually put this into action? So the habitat elements are food, water, and shelter, just like we all need, plus green gardening practices, so the place that we garden is safe. And I imagine a lot of you already do a fair bit of this already, but as we move through, hopefully you'll get some new ideas to inspire you along. So the first element is food. Of course, flowers are important, nectar and pollen, they're pollinators, but a lot of our pollinators actually, like some of our butterflies, they do something different. Some of them mud puddle, which means they get a lot of their food, their minerals, from wet earth, sand, compost, manure. The one you see here on the left actually was by the edge of a river. I saw one feeding from washed up seaweed of sorts, some kind of plant matter. You'll also see on the top right there, there's a spider. Spiders and insects are an incredibly important part of the diet of hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are pollinators. Yes, they go to flowers, but it's been estimated from different people anywhere from 20 to 80% of their diet needs protein or consists of protein, and they need the insects and spiders for that. Of course, tree sap is great for some other creatures. Yellow-bellied sapsuckers go along. They're kind of woodpeckers. They make holes in trees, and then the sap runs out, and then hummingbirds and some butterflies are known to then follow them and drink the sap. So a variety of food. But I'm going to talk mainly about flowers because that is the key one that we have control over, and that is a really huge one. if you can have different flower shapes and sizes of the plants that you choose and you bring home to your garden, that's very important. When I talk about pollinators, you'll see there's so many sizes from just 3 millimeters long to quite large. Their mouths are different, their habitats, their lifestyle is different. So if you can have tubular flowers, open flowers, big ones, small ones, different colors, mix it up, then you're supporting more of our pollinators. Regionally native plants are really, really important. It's fine if you want to bring home some favorites, but native plants to your area have co-evolved with our wildlife for so long that they have often created a fantastic relationship. And so that's very important if you can maintain that. Blooms from early spring to late fall. And again, some of these pollinators will wake up first thing in the spring, like the queen bumblebee that needs food to start her colony. Same with the mining bees that will go and pollinate our the red maple flowers, mason bees, also known as orchard bees, spring fruiting or flowering shrubs that make the fruit for us. And then there's others that come out at different times during the summer and the fall, of course. Hummingbirds will need the food to get ready for migration and along their migration path. Same with monarchs. Some will hibernate. They'll need the food to get their soar ready to survive the winter. So if you can have plants right throughout the growing season, the better. And of course, different kinds of plants will create this environment. When you're buying plants, some things to watch out for is that a lot of, well, I don't know how many, but quite a number of plants have been played with. They've been cultivated and such to change the qualities to suit us. Sometimes what happens is the flowers that are fertile, they produce the pollen and nectar, become sterile. So for instance, the Mophead Hydrangea was based on a hydrangea where the outside petals are very showy, but they're sterile. Inside the center of the flower are all the fertile flowers that have the food. They played with them to the point where you have this Mophead Hydrangea, which is all showy petals. There's no food left. So it's pretty for us, but it's useless to wildlife. Sometimes there are plants that are so poofy with extra showy petals. There's still some pollen or nectar, but it can be hard for the pollinators to actually find the food. So be mindful of that. And again, if you have a favorite, include it if you've got the space, but just if you can have a larger proportion of plants that are still producing food, then that's great. A lot of plants have been grown with neonicotinoids. Now, they're a group of pesticides that can be tenacious. Even if the seed is sprayed with them, it can last in the plant right through until it makes pollen and nectar, harming or even killing our pollinators. Now, I've asked at nurseries, do you grow plants with neonicotinoids? And I've been told no. But my local nursery said, but we got seeds from our supplier, and the fine print said that they used neonicotinoids on their seeds, so they sent them back because they want none of that. So it's great to ask questions, find out who was doing what, and if they're not even aware of it or they're not caring, it shows the consumer demand, the consumer interest, and that will shift the tide to ensure that we don't have these poisonous chemicals in these plants. And of course, if you can avoid invasive plants, there are resources. We do have some links online for your province. You can find out what's invasive in your area. They can spread, again, it's all different. Some will spread fairly quickly and they're not necessarily invasive, but those that are invasive are ones that are not from the area. They do spread quickly. They move into our natural systems, our ecosystems, and they can push out native plants, like the Norway Maple, for instance. It's a tree that's been commonly planted by municipalities and us, and there's even like a red leaf variety, which some people think is a native maple. It's not. And what happens is the seeds spread, moves into our natural areas. It outcompetes our natural trees and also shades out some of the wildflowers on the bottom. So it has less diversity and our animals suffer as a result. They're not even useful for birds to nest in because it's non-native. So the insects have not co-evolved with it. So hardly any insects go to the tree, which means birds aren't going to want to nest there because they don't have their available food source. They don't want to leave their babies too long and leave them exposed searching for food. Plus they waste a lot of energy. So it's really, plus we're talking about pollinators. A lot of these butterflies and moths, need a lot of our native trees. And some people think, oh, I don't want insects in my tree, but really any damage done is so hard to see most of the time. We only really see damage if it's a non-native or an out of control pest. Usually it's very not noticeable and it's actually really great to support. So check out that. And people sometimes think they're weedy. They're actually very beautiful. We have a demonstration garden around our headquarters and we grow native plants to show people how lovely they are. Spring plants right from the beginning. Depending on where you are in the country, you've got bloodroot. Willows are fantastically helpful. wild ginger, the pin cherry. There's an apple there. It's not native, but apples are beneficial. They're not invasive and they're great. Here's a miterwort, tiny little flowers for a tiny little pollinator, little hoverfly. Summer plants, again, keep the flowers going year round: verbena, columbine, brown-eyed Susan, bergamot, a native hibiscus, cardinal flower. We've got native lilies in Canada, as well as native columbines, native spirea, of course, milkweeds, which are very important for our monarchs. They have to have the milkweed as their food larval plant. There's many species of milkweed across the country, which we have information about on our website. More summer plants with the lupin, liatris, wild roses, lots of wild roses in Canada. They're great for pollinators. And finally, autumn plants, the asters, goldenrods, obedient plant, and some of our native sunflowers. So that's food. Water, it can be simple, saucer, fancy dish, but put some pebbles in it, some stones in it, so our pollinators who do want to drink water can perch. There's a picture there of a bee on my daughter's wading pool when she was little, and that's what really opened my eyes. Oh my gosh, these guys need water. At least a lot of them do. Hummingbirds like a mist. I'm a very big fan of water conservation, but if you want to get a hose in the crook of a tree and for say 5 minutes every day at the exact same time, put it onto a fine mist, hummingbirds in the area, I'm told, will learn it and they will fly through it because they love the humidity. They love the moisture that way. I'm not sure if there's any questions so far, if I should keep going to the third component. Maybe I'll finish the last habitat component and then we can check for questions. So we got food and water. So shelter, again, is really key. You get cover from the elements like the heat and the rain, the wind, protection from predators, nesting and resting spots, a place to finish development, which I'll talk a bit later, like the leaf litter below trees, really important for a lot of butterflies and moths, and perches to spy their next meal, such as, a hummingbird looking to get the next flying insect. And shelter, often, you can get shelter from so many types of plants. Mix it up. If you have the space for trees and shrubs, great. If you can have vines and ferns and grasses, great. If you have a large property and you have a dead or dying tree and it's safely away from human activity, leave it if you can, because that's so important, not just for pollinators because of the insects and whatnot, but also very, very important for your birds too, if you like the birds. Have as much variety as you can. Now, more specifically beyond plants, you can have logs. Some bees will nest in fallen logs. Leaf litter is really great for some pollinators. Stone piles, brush piles, open areas of sand and earth we'll talk about later, great for ground nesting bees. Plant stems are great for some bees that will, again, nest in little pithy stems. Tall grass, that's great for some fireflies that need that habitat to live. And bird bat and bee houses, supplemental houses can be great. I highly recommend that if you do it, it's supplementing natural habitat, or you just be very careful as to what you make or buy, because there are some out there that really aren't very suitable. We have information on our website about what we recommend. So together, the food, water, shelter creates spaces like we do for our houses, spaces to live, spaces to move around, just like walls and furniture make space for us. So those are the three habitat elements. I'm going to now get into how to manage it safely, just briefly before we dive into the pollinators. But if anyone has any questions about that, I can stop here. I think you might be muted, Sarah.
Of course I am. Silly me. It looks like we have some questions coming up about recommendations on plants and fertilizers. Would that fit into the sort of your you had one of your slides was on sort of food and water. Would fertilizers fit into that?
Well, we're going to talk about compost because that's a natural fertilizer, so we can save that for later then, because that's certainly one of my favorites. So we'll get into that now then, if you like. So once you've created this space, you want to make sure it's safe, and also if you can use sustainable practices to work with Mother Nature rather than against it. So if you're going to avoid pesticides, you want to help nature work with you and for you. So have a diversity of plants that will attract a diversity of allies, such as, insecting birds, bats, toads, snakes, other beneficial insects like dragonflies. And the more of a diversity you have there, the more they can help you. If you want your plants to do well and not be attacked by any insects, then make sure they're putting them in the right spot and you water them well initially and that they have a chance to thrive. you do need to use something, I suggest go as gently as possible to begin with, like maybe just a hose. You need to wash something down, and if that doesn't work, then try a soap spray. But there often are gentler ways to deal with things before you get to the harsh things. Compost is a great, so we talk about fertilizer, compost is great. It means it takes your food scraps, your leaf and yard waste, turns it into what's called gardener's gold. It's a wonderful soil amendment. It loosens up hard pan clay. It can help bind sandy soil. It returns nutrients to the earth and the roots at a wonderful, gentle pace, unlike some of the synthetic fertilizers that can blast them too fast. It also means it gets it out of our landfill. By composting, it means you're not putting it in the garbage. So it doesn't make the toxic leachate, and it means as taxpayers, we don't have to site a new landfill any earlier than needed. You can even make compost tea if you want. Take some compost, put it in a bucket, dilute it with water, and then you can use that to feed your plants. Otherwise, you can dig the compost straight into the earth. So water conservation is great. If you want to use a rain barrel to catch some water, water in the morning before the sun wants to evaporate it, water at the base of plants so it gets directly to the roots. Again, less evaporation, and native and drought tolerant species are best. Mulching is super great because it conserves the moisture of the earth. It keeps weeds to a minimum. What weeds come up are easy to pull out, returns nutrients to the soil, generally speaking, if you use a natural one, helps with soil erosion, minimization, that. Soil temperature, so the hot summer, it can help keep the roots in even temperature. I recommend avoiding dyed mulch. We don't really know what that's doing to the soil ecology of all the microorganisms in there. And if you do use mulch, I will talk about how our solitary bees need to dig into the ground. A lot of them are ground nesting bees. If you do use mulch, use a finely shredded one so it's easier for them to dig through. Although I'm now at the point where I have mulch on some beds and I have some areas that are not mulch. So again, it gives them a variety. And then green lawn care. When you cut your grass, if you can leave your grass clippings on the lawn, it's great. It should theoretically be, gone in a few days if you have a healthy soil with lots of microorganisms. So now we're going to talk about car pollinators, which is probably what everyone is looking forward to. So if there's no questions about that, then I'll just dive right in. If that's okay, Sarah.
Sounds great.
Okay, so there's 7 different kinds of pollinators in Canada. We have bees and flies. They're our main ones. Butterflies, moths, beetles, and hummingbirds are also helpful, but bees and flies are definitely our main ones. So if you look at bees alone, in Canada, we have over 900 native species that are known in Canada. Yes, there are honeybees, but they're not native. They're kind of like managing a crop the way you'd manage cows. So our native bees have a role to play in our ecosystem, and it's really important that we support them. And I love looking at our bees. They're so different. If you look at the top left, that's a mason bee, also known as an orchard bee. They're the ones that pollinate like our apple trees and our other fruit trees. A lot of different kinds of bumblebees. The bottom in the middle there you see it's a halictid bee. I'm not sure exactly which one. There's a few different green sweat bee type creatures. And then if you look at, again, bees up close, you can see that they carry pollen differently. Some carry them on their legs high up, some low down. Some of them carry it on their abdomen. This is a beautiful picture of one of our bumblebees on a goldenrod. And I know some people have a concern with goldenrod. They think it causes hay fever. It actually is known not to. Its pollen is far too heavy to be doing that. And the worst thing you have to worry about goldenrod is some species will spread. Some will not. Some are in the shade and they hardly ever spread at all. This one will spread, the Canada goldenrod, I believe it is. But again, you can always just minimize it by cutting off the flower heads once they begin to go to seed. And if they do spread with the roots, you can dig them up as you would do many other plants. But they're a really great pollinator plant in the fall. Here's a bloodroot flower up close with the bee, and you can see it's a very tiny bee because I really zoomed in on it. And it went on its side all the way around the flower gathering pollen. This is a tiny little bee landing on a tiny little basil flower. So yes, we can grow native plants in our favorites, but if you let some of your herbs go to flower, they're also going to benefit the tinier pollinators as well. And if you look at this picture, they both look like bees, but one is not. One is actually a fly, one of a syrphid fly. And you can see the one on the left the one on the right rather has the pollen sac on its leg. So that's a giveaway. Plus, when you look more closely, you can learn that the eyes on the one on the left actually look like fly eyes, and the one on the right actually has more bee eyes. And the more you look, you sort of get used to those little tricks to tell them apart. And that flower is called buttonbush. It's a really cool flower native to Eastern Canada. And here's a bunch of others. So on the left, you have leafcutter bees. They're so cool. They cut little bits of leaves in little circles, and they use that to line their nests. I'll just pause and talk a little bit about the difference between solitary bees and social bees, because I'm going to get more and more into how they do live and how they do nest. So the bumblebees are social bees. They create a little colony. Nor as big as the honeybee, definitely smaller. But a lot of our bees, most of our bees are solitary. All they do basically is they mate. The females create a space for the eggs, like a tunnel, and they lay the eggs, supply each egg with a little bit of food, seal it off, do a few of those, seal it off completely, and away they go, usually to die. And the little ones then start their cycle at some point after that. So they line their nests differently. Some we have called cellophane bees. They can nest in the ground even where it's very wet, and the cellophane type substance that they secrete lines the nest in the ground to the point where it's very waterproof. The leafcutter bee here you see on the left, it's carrying the pollen on its abdomen. You can see all that orangey, yellowy stuff underneath its tummy. They will line their nest with pieces of leaves that they cut. And I've been told that they're actually very smart, and they'll often choose leaves with have like antimicrobial, antibacterial type of qualities to help keep the nest safe. On the right, you see another kind of goldenrod. It's a goldenrod bee of some sort. They're a specialist to that plant. And the top is a hawthorn flower with one of our green sweat bees. They're all solitary bees, and solitary bees are generally very gentle. Most of them don't have stingers anymore. Those that do can't penetrate your skin, and the very, very few that can, I'm told you don't feel anything. They're very gentle, they're very docile, and if you do have them on your property, not to be alarmed. Be careful, obviously, until you know what you're dealing with. Obviously, have an ounce of caution, but generally speaking, you don't need to get panicky just because you see a bee in your lawn. And again, we're talking about solitary bee nesting tips. Some of them will nest in with pithy stems, but most are in the ground. So if you can leave an area of your garden open, it might be a sparse patch of lawn, it might be on the edge of some trees. As long as it's sunny, chances are there'll be a bee that will want to make a nest there. And there's so many different kinds, and they nest all differently. And some of them will nest close together for protection, not from us, just from other bees. And there's some cuckoo bees that will go and lay their eggs in and whatnot. So they do want to still protect themselves. So sometimes they will share guard duty on the entrance of the hole. They're all really fascinating how they live. But if you can leave an area for them, so if they are nesting in the ground, again, if you think they are ground nesting bees, chances are they're safe. It's great if you can support them. Some will go in pithy stems like sumac and raspberry and such, elderberry. They might, if you can leave some stems of some of your perennials too, you might find that they're actually making their nests in there. Some of them will go into wood, like stumps and logs. So if those are the ones that often people will try to sort of mimic homes for, like mason bees and such. If you do want to do that, there are some really large bee houses out there. What new research is showing is that the big ones are more problematic than anything because they're attracting the parasitic species, which will kill off the eggs, use the food for their babies, and so they don't have to do any work. So if you can have just small little homes discreetly placed around the garden, that's typically best. And there are some resources. There's the Fletcher Wildlife Garden. I can share that link at the end, or in a follow-up email. They have some great resources for mason bees, how they do that. But otherwise, if you want to just drill some holes in some wood, that's great, but just change it every so often too, because after a while, you might get moldy, might be unhealthy. So just keep changing home every few years, keep it small, keep it discreet. That would be great.
So there's a question here. And really, okay. Last time when we had this conversation in the beginning of spring, I was eager to get outside, and you're like, no, bees, and that they need the ground cover now. So don't go cleaning up your garden just yet. They need to be protected. And so I resisted. Oh, it was hard, but I did. And Nina had a question here, which it relates to a question that I have as well, is for these, in the spring when we're eager to get going on the garden, but we want to do something, but we want to sort of protect those that are still needing the cover. Is there early bloomers that are, Nina has native to Ottawa, but I mean, I'm in the West. Are there Are there native bloomers that we can plant so that we're helping these pollinators earlier in the season when we want to get going on our garden and want to see that freshness? And like, do you have recommendations for those?
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a lot of early spring plants that we can grow, and our website does have a list, again, because everyone's across the country. It's hard to say specifically which ones. You know, typically early bloomers will be ones in deciduous forests, where the ones with the trees their leaves. So in early spring, before the leaves come out, the light is filtering down to the forest floor, and those plants then are making use of that light to bloom and make their fruit and do their thing. And those are good ones for the early bees, definitely. And a lot of those will be growing in, because they're under the trees, the leaves have stayed on the ground, they're nourishing the soil, they're giving some protection, and those plants are attuned to growing in that condition. So that's, again, giving cover with the leaves, and the flowers are giving great food for them. Hope that answers your question.
Wonderful. And you were saying that list was just online of plants for the region?
So a native plant encyclopedia online, which people can go to. There's 2 different tabs, a detailed tab and a basic one, and you can key in where you are, who you want to attract. Is it sun or shade? What flower color you're looking for, tree, shrub, and it pulls up a whole bunch of choices for you as a great starting point. And we also have a native plant supplier list, so you can hopefully find someone in your area who does sell a proportion of native plants to help you with that.
Wonderful. For our participants here in the Zoom meeting, I'm going to pop that link right in the chat, and then I'll go over and pop it on the YouTube chat as well.
Thank you. So there was a lot to be said about bees because they're such a big, diverse group. They live so differently, and they're fascinating, and they're really cool. And again, always be careful with them. But you know, for the most part, if you're peaceful, you can get really close to all kinds of creatures. Now we're going to get into flies. Flies are actually overlooked a lot of the time, but they're a huge, huge pollinating force in Canada, especially because of our climate. Hoverflies, syrphid flies, they're also known as flower flies. It's a large group, and they're fantastically important both in agriculture and in our gardens. And at the top, you see 2 different kinds. They've got quite a few different patterns. They look like wasps to some people. They often think, oh, I saw a little wasp. They're actually flies. At the bottom, it's called bee fly. I saw that in a nursery, and I had my cell phone and took a picture and blew it up just so you could see a little bit of its face as well. But all kinds of different flies pollinate. Beetles, some beetles also pollinate too. We're all familiar with the firefly, I think. It's actually a beetle, even though it's called a fly. And in their adult phase, they do a lot of them. I don't know how many because it's not quite known, actually. There's still people figuring that stuff out. But a lot of them do pollinate. And when they're young in their larval stage, they actually are eating some of the critters that we would consider pesky as well. So they're very beneficial to have. I talked a little bit about habitat for them. They like the tall grass, they like the moisture. So if you can leave a little bit of your garden, maybe a corner part of your garden, a little bit wild, let the grass grow tall, let some of those weeds grow. A lot of birds will eat those weed seeds. Again, people are concerned about ticks and unsightliness. So again, just pick a spot if you're comfortable in the corner of your garden where you can perhaps in front put some flowers. You can be benefiting a variety of creatures. And there's another little beetle on a flea bane there. Butterflies, they're not huge pollinators, but they do pollinate to some degree. So definitely still important to support them for a variety of reasons. They're also really beautiful. And their larvae are fantastically important food for our birds. I was told that, for example, chickadees need like 9,000 caterpillars to feed 1 clutch of egg while they're still in the nest. That's not even after they leave the nest. So butterfly and moths help that as well. A lot of flowers support our butterflies, shrubs as well as herbaceous perennials. They have to have a food larval plant. They have to have something for their caterpillars to feed on. And they're typically specialists. They usually have a few plants, a few trees or shrubs or herbaceous perennials that they need in order to, lay their caterpillars, lay their eggs, and the caterpillars to feed for them to become adults. And of course, the monarch is famous now. Everyone knows, I think, that they have to have the milkweed as their larval food plant. They also need shelter too. So the trees and shrubs and other layers that you create in your garden provide shelter for a lot of different creatures, including butterflies. Some of them, as I mentioned, do mud puddles, so you can recreate this by getting some sand, not sterilized sand, just regular sand. And you can wet it and see if they come. I know sometimes in my garden, if I put compost down and I watered it, a whole ton of butterflies will come and feed, as well as in our parking lot at the bottom right, or the bottom left, sorry. I saw my first time ever seeing a checker spot butterfly at work last summer. Even in the parking lot, there was a crack, and there was a little bit of earth in the crack, and it was a little bit moist. And this butterfly availed itself to getting some nutrients there. So you can support them in a variety of ways. Wasps, now here's another topic. A lot of people get freaked out when they hear the word wasp. And yes, there are some that sting. They have colony that they're very careful to protect when you're near it. As far as those wasps are concerned, yes, you always got to be careful, have common sense. That said, doesn't mean you need to jump into fear automatically. I've had paper wasps come and land right next to my shoulder while I'm sitting on the stairs of my front porch. And it would just take a little bit of, scrape a little bit of wood away, not enough to really notice, but it would take it, fly off and to its nest, which was just in the garden, and do its thing. Never wanted anything to do with me. I also took a picture at the bottom there of that wasp on our aster, and I got very close. It was just busy feeding. It didn't care what I was doing. I was also, not irritating it, and I wasn't right near its home. So have common sense, be careful, but doesn't mean you have to right away fear them. And that said, most of our wasps are solitary. So like the bees, they're not out to get us. They don't have a colony to protect. Their stinger has evolved to paralyze, immobilize prey, like insects and caterpillars, to bring back to their nests. So where the solitary bees leave bee bread, which is a mixture of pollen and saliva and nectar, these guys leave katydids, caterpillars and grasshoppers. So they're useful in that way. You don't need to be alarmed. And if you see creatures that you wonder what on earth they are, it could be a solitary wasp. You see one on the left there stuffing a hole in a log with dry grass. That's an Isodontia type of wasp, which is kind of neat. We had them in our garden as well, in our block. So there's lots of wasps to explore if you have the interest. Lots of moths too. A lot of them don't even feed. Some of them will only live as adults for 2 weeks. They'll mate, lay eggs and die. But the hummingbird clearing moths, they feed during the day, and they look like hummingbirds because they hover in front of the flower rather than landing on it. And people love seeing them. They're really great. Now, as far as I was mentioning a little bit about, you need shelter for some animals to continue their development. This is a good example. A lot of eggs will be laid in trees. The caterpillars will grow, but a lot will have to drop off from the tree into the leaf litter below to finish its development. But because we're so tidy, we take away the leaves. We have hard ground. It's exposed. A lot of these creatures cannot finish their development because we are too manicured. So if you're able to have trees where perhaps you have a garden bed below it where you leave the trees and you have our native spring ephemerals growing, like trilliums and bloodroot and hepatica and other things, then maybe you can make it attractive enough for you to allow these guys to have some habitat. Hummingbirds, another one, they will go to all kinds of native flowers, tubular flowers, but even tiny, tiny tubular flowers. At the bottom left, you see a zinnia. Now, it's not native, it's an annual, but it's a beneficial annual, especially if it's not been overcultivated. And hummingbirds will go to that. They still need trees to nest. I've often seen them in pines and cedars, but they go to some other trees as well. Of course, they need the protein. So we talked about a variety of habitat components, food, water, shelter, keeping it safe that you can support. Just keep in mind to make it fun, keep it enjoyable, tackle only what you feel inspired to take on. And keep in mind proportions. If you just have a small, tiny little garden, obviously you may not be able to fit too much in it, but the more space you have, the more opportunity you have to create habitat for our wildlife. We need it now more than ever. And it can be anything. You can have any gardening style, budget, property size, include all of your lifestyle needs, and you can still support wildlife. I'll just talk a little bit about certification, because if you do any of these, to some degree, then you can apply for garden habitat certification with the Canadian Wildlife Federation. We've had people with shorelines and large acreages to teeny tiny little gardens to little plots of land that have applied, and they show that they have the food, water, shelter. They don't use pesticides, so it's safe. If you do get certified, you get a certificate in decal, and you're eligible to buy a sign, which can help raise awareness in your community, help get the discussion going, and show people what you're doing. The form is pretty straightforward in terms of what we're looking for, because we're not there to see your garden in person. If you want to include a sketch, it's kind of a neat way to take stock of your property. It can be as simple and basic and messy as you like. It can be fancy and artistic if you like. We've seen them all. But we do need some pictures, and it just shows we have all kinds of people. We have businesses. The Conservation Council of New Brunswick only has this tiny little strip along the sidewalk, and they managed to make that into a pollinator garden. And again, it can be a very, very simple effort, but your chances are you're still helping wildlife. So we encourage people to explore this. We have 2 different kinds of signs. And if you're certified, you get a leaf pin on a map to show that we are growing our habitat. We are connecting each other. And it doesn't have your address. We try to keep it private, but it does just basically pinpoint you to your town or your city. And there are resources to support you. We have a Facebook page, Gardening for Wildlife group. You're welcome to join. We have a demonstration garden if you are ever in the Ottawa area to walk around. I know it's been different recently, but we have a lot of pictures online from there too. And iNaturalist Canada is a really great resource. It's something where if you take a picture of something you see and you're not sure what it is, you can upload it to iNaturalist, and there's all kinds of average people and scientists that can help you identify it. Plus, you might discover something really important, like a new discovery in Canada that's never been known before, which has happened. So it's growing quickly. People really are taking to this. It's fantastic for scientists. It's fantastic for one another. You can create projects for your community. We're creating one for gardeners, so watch out for that. And online, we have a variety of resources. We have handouts you can download or request to order. We have some posters, quite a few posters, a newsletter you can sign up for called Grow Wild, glossary, a variety of things, articles, tips. And at the end, some point Sarah will be sending a follow-up email, and you'll get access, if you fill out the survey, to our new 20-page colorful guide, which talks about what I've spoken about and has a handy checklist at the end to help you plan your garden. I think that's basically it. So now I'm ready for questions.
Wonderful. Well, I know that there have been many questions that come up, and I'll bring one straight from YouTube right now. And it has to do with bees. And I've heard that many bees are dying because of colony collapse disorder. What's the cause of this?
I don't know, and I'm really not up on all the specifics of all the different colony collapsing and the different challenges. I have heard different theories. I mean, the neonics has been a huge one because, again, it does get into their body depending on how much exposure they've had. They may not die right away, but again, if you're in an area where there's a lot of plants that have been sprayed with this is going to affect a lot of creatures. I had one lady email me saying she noticed a difference once the smart meters were installed. So we have no idea how that's affecting things. I really don't know, but just keep listening and hearing the latest news as it comes out, as I am, because that's definitely something researchers are paying attention to. And I'm sorry, I don't know more about that myself.
Wonderful. We had a question about using fertilizers versus compost. What are the benefits of both, and which ones should people be sort of using, or when? Well,
again, you have to decide for yourself. I've never been one to use commercial fertilizers. I kind of tend to just want to trust the natural way. So I make compost, and I trust. I know that works. I know that really does nourish the plant the way it likes, and it also is a great thing for the soil because it loosens it up. It allows for air and water to move well for the plant. I suspect you can use commercial fertilizers in small doses and gently, but I have been told, if you use them excessively, or they can just be very intense for the plants. So it's not something that I tend to use. So I can't speak very fully about synthetic fertilizers. I like to use what the plants know and are designed to use myself.
All right, thank you. Now, Colleen asked in the chat, There says that she uses soap spray at times, but doesn't know how to make garlic spray or why she would use it. Can you give us some ideas around that?
Sure, and it's never been my favorite subject in terms of repelling creatures because it really depends on what's going on. For instance, at work, we have one kind of native sunflower that always seems to attract every year red aphids. And for a little while, it doesn't look that great, but we've discovered from year to year, they never do any real damage. So we now leave them. But initially we would use a hose for that and wash them off with water. Some things we add soap spray to, because again, that really can affect how easily they come off the plant and them coming back to the plant. Garlic can be a little bit more the next step up. I can't even think of an example why I would use it because it's been so long since I made a garlic spray. But there have been in the past instances, but I'm sorry, I can't remember even why I used it. So generally speaking, you probably can get away without even using the garlic spray. I can't remember if it was like something stronger, like it was a mildew problem, or I can't remember, sorry. We do have information online about that, which is there, but it's never been my forte.
No, it's good to, I mean, sometimes it's even just being able to point towards a resource that we can find the answers, because we can't all be amazing experts in everything, especially if you're not using it yourself. But thank you for, we'll check the website then.
Yeah, because garlic generally is good, so like as an antibacterial, antifungal kind of thing. So if it's more if you're dealing with those microorganisms rather than an actual insect itself, I don't think you have to use it necessarily for insects.
Wonderful. So Eliza, who's from Calgary, she's worried about her computer video, but she's going to ask her question via audio. So I'm going to.
Okay, great.
See if.
Hello. I'm not sure if this is working or if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
You can? Perfect.
Yeah. Welcome, Eliza.
Thank you so much. So my question was how you use your compost effectively on your plants, and if you need to prepare it in any way, or if you can just take it from your home and apply it that way, but I'm not too sure how effective that would be, and if you do anything in particular to get it to be effective.
Okay, yeah, so like if you're creating a brand new bed, I would mix it in with the soil. If you have an existing bed and you're putting some new plants in, when you create the hole for the plant, you generally make it much larger than the root ball. So the earth is loosened up so the roots have an easier chance to spread. Then I would mix some of the compost in with the existing soil just to add some nourishment that way. It's a great soil amendment in terms of structure. So those are the two ways I would do it. You can also put it on the soil. People sometimes do that as kind of a mulch. And it would slowly get the nutrients down, like the rain would wash the nutrients down into the soil. You won't get the same benefits as the actual organic matter in the earth itself in terms of helping with the aeration and such, but it's still benefiting. And again, you can also make the compost tea, which if you want, it can be, that might be a bit smelly if you leave it too long, but if you leave it for a day, strain the water, you can water your plants with that.
Wonderful.
You can even use it on your lawn. Some people even sprinkle it on their lawn every year. And then what happens is, if it's your own compost, you've got your microorganisms in there and they're getting into the lawn, well, the soil of the lawn, and therefore you're increasing the health of your lawn and benefiting it that way. So if you buy it in a bag and it's sealed, you're getting some of the nutrients from the compost, you're getting some of the soil amendment properties, but you're not probably getting the microorganisms because they might have been suffocated from the sealed bag. So just keep that in mind as to what you're using it for and the different ways that you can get the compost. And we do have actually quite a large section about compost online about making your own.
And Nina asked a follow-up sort of related to that, is like, is there, for store-bought compost, like, is there an ideal sort of formula, or is there something to look for to know that this is the best one?
If you're making it yourself, I would just say keep layering your dries and your wets, your greens and your browns. So your kitchen scraps and your leaf and yard waste. I saved some leaves and I would every now and again put that on top of the kitchen waste. Helps keep the smell down. It just means the microorganisms are getting what they need as food to digest it all properly, and therefore you should not have any smell. If it's too much of one, you may have a smell if it's too much of the other, it may not be very active. So if you're talking about making your own, generally speaking, just add what you have in, as long as it's not like an animal product. And you can even leave it and it'll do its own thing. Some people speed it up by actually mixing it, and that'll speed things up. But generally speaking, making compost is fairly foolproof. And if you get a smell, there's always a reason why, and you can deal with it.
Oh, wonderful. Now, Roxana has a question as well. I'm going to see, Roxana, would you like to ask it yourself, or would you like me to ask? I'm going to see if she can unmute here. All right, I'll quickly ask, is there a more natural way to get rid of wasp nests?
That's really hard to say, because again, there are a few different kinds that do. I'm assuming you're talking about the social wasps, the ones that can sting you when they're trying to protect their home. Honestly, that is a tough one. I've even had to deal with it myself. You know, a natural way, I saw one building a nest right outside our door, and it was very tiny. Nothing had been really made, so I bravely myself went very quickly with a plastic bag, grabbed it, and ran to the end of the garden, which was a really long garden, ran right to the end and left it. So she could get out and make her home, but somewhere else. I have had them also like higher up on the house, and they've never bothered us. I've had them in a tree right near the house with my daughter and I playing on the ground. They've never bothered us. It just depends on how close, what kind of wasp it is. So removing it, keep that in mind when you remove it. Just because it's there doesn't necessarily mean you have to get rid of it. But of course, if it's near a house, near human activity, you've got concerns, you definitely need to deal with it. I would be very careful though, because I don't know of any natural ways that are the safe way to remove it. So that's when you might want to actually check with an expert.
Yes, I will always check with an expert when it comes to wasps.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a way to help prevent some wasps from making nests. You can actually buy sort of fake paper wasp nests. They're basically thin paper in a wire frame, and it comes flat, and then you can open it up. Then you hang it near your home, and it tells them, oh, there's already some wasps in the area. We can't make our nest here. So if you have a concern and you've seen it before, maybe explore that. I've done it, and it can help repel them or just deter them.
Trickery, perfect.
Yeah.
So Sam has a question about weeds and what counts as bad weeds.
Well, I find that such a relative term, because a weed is just a plant in the wrong place, and who gets to decide that? So to me, grass in a garden bed is a weed, whereas grass in the lawn is fine. So it's a matter of finding out what's okay for you. I'm the kind of person also where personally, I have harvested a lot of weeds because I've learned the Europeans brought them over because they've got a lot of nutrients in them. So to me, yeah, I will take out some dandelions for sure. I don't want my lawn totally overrun with them, but I'll also eat them because the roots are really good for your liver. The leaves have got vitamins in it. It's really good for you. I've even dehydrated a lot of these weed leaves and ground them to a powder and sprinkled them on my food after. So weeds is such a relative thing. Some people will actually grow dandelions now and sell them in the grocery store. So it's in terms of a bad weed, yeah, that's really hard to say. If it's something that you find is tenacious, that is really constantly coming up in places you don't want it, and I guess that's a weed you want to get rid of. And you can look online. We don't have it on ours, I don't think, but I have seen where people talk about, okay, I've got these weeds. It's a symptom of my soil being too acidic, or it's a symptom of my soil being too whatever. And then you can figure out what's going on, and maybe you can adjust your soil a little bit to stop those weeds from growing. You can also maybe thicken your area, so mulch will keep the weeds down. If you have a lawn, you can thicken your lawn with overseeding. In your garden beds, you can plant plants closer together. Again, it keeps the weeds from actually getting hold. So there's different tricks you can do there, and there is more information online about weeds as well.
And if anyone needs it, don't go to the store to buy dandelions. You can just come over to my place and I'll give you lots. So Nina's joining us from Canada, and she has a question for you now.
Okay.
Go ahead, Nina.
Hi, Sarah. Can you hear me?
Can hear you well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So back to the compost. I don't make my own compost. I'm new to this wildlife gardening. And so when planting my seedlings, I want to know if I should buy from the store any type of compost, whether it be sheep or mushroom or shrimp. There's various types out there. Or should I be doing a peat moss? Or so that's why I've been asking the questions about the fertilizer. And I'm asking this because I've had some that have perished, and I think I've messed up on the hardening off process. So I'm being a bit more vigilant on wanting to save my plants.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, definitely. I've grown a lot of plants from seed, and I can understand about the hardening off. You can definitely lose plants if you go a bit too fast. Just increasing the time each day, and strong wind, and sometimes you get crazy weather, and that can really stress them. If you're going to buy fertilizer, I think a lot of it can be trial and error in general. Some plants do prefer certain types of fertilizer, and so you could just look up what kind of plants you have and see if they have a preference. Watch out for, though, like you mentioned, sheep's manure. If you were to get sheep's manure, hopefully it's aged, because chicken manure, sheep's manure, all that kind of manure, if it's relatively fresh, like I guess the first couple of years, the nitrogen content, I think, can be so high that it can burn the roots. So I actually got some this year from a local farmer who's very organically minded, but she wasn't sure how old it was. So I've just been mixing it very carefully with a whole lot of other soil. So there is some, but it's not enough to burn the roots, because she wasn't sure if it was going to do that. So unfortunately, it is a little bit of trial and error as well. Mushroom compost generally has been pretty good for me. Yeah, there's so many different kinds of compost out there now. I just try to get ones that are organic, that haven't had anything added to it. So if it's just the pure natural item, then I tend to go with that. I don't know if that's helpful enough to you or not.
Yeah, I think likely that picking something up from Walmart is not fitting the bill. I think I have to go to a garden center and ask more questions.
That's a really good idea, because some garden centers really do have knowledgeable staff, especially if you're dealing with seedlings and they are that much more sensitive to certain things.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Nina. Now, I think this came from my statement earlier about not cleaning up in spring, but someone is wondering, when should they start? Well, like, what are the signs that your garden is ready in the spring to be cleaned up? That's
a good one. Yeah, so sometimes they say wait for it to be consistently above, say, 15 degrees Celsius. And then by then, all those dormant creatures that have been in the leaf litter overwintering should have had enough time to finish their cycle. Unfortunately, I don't know the nitty gritty about that. That is something that I would like to still learn more about, but I leave it as late as possible. So for instance, going back to the fall, I don't even do like a fall cleanup. I leave the seed heads on my perennials, because there are a variety of birds that will come and eat them. Juncos, finches, chickadees, I think the red poles might come as well. So they will come and eat. And then in the fall, now I'm more careful about cutting back stems too. If the stem had the seed head on it, I'll cut it back, because an animal, solitary bee, would not have made its home in it. But generally speaking, then I will cut them back if I think it's safe. But as far as the leaves, I leave the leaves on the ground as long as possible, because again, once it's warming up, those other animals have this signal to continue developing and do their thing and fly off or crawl off before they get harmed. I did clean up a little bit earlier in one bed this year for different reasons, but I left the leaves in an open container so that if there was someone in there, they could still crawl out. So I thought that was also trying to be helpful to them. But if you are interested in that, I encourage you to explore. In fact, I've even got his latest book here, Doug Tallamy. He talks a lot about that in his first book and this latest book, and he's got some great tips on these things, and he connects a lot of dots, which I find fascinating. Awesome, thank you so much. So we have one last question I think we have time for here, and it's from Shelley, and she lives in Toronto, and she says that she has many native plants in her garden attracting bees and other pollinators, but she has not seen many bumblebees. And what's sort of the state of bumblebees, and is this sort of a common occurrence now in our gardens? People are seeing a lot less bees. Bumblebees there's several species of bumblebees, but they're the one that we often think of and recognize, and people are definitely seeing less of them. So there is concern with many insects. There's less insects hitting our windshield as we drive. There's less insects coming and pollinating our plants. I've had stories from people saying she has to pollinate her own cucumber now because of some spraying going on in her area. But yeah, so if you can plant as much as possible, and if you can encourage whatever you can for the area to be safe, whether it's your municipality, whether it's yourself, community gardens, to do their best to be as organically minded as possible. So we're putting as little poison in our systems as possible, which also eventually, you know, goes down the drain and back into our rivers or our well water. So it's going to benefit us in the long term too.
Thanks so much. I think that's a great way to end today, is to be, you know, you can take the initiative within your community to advocate on behalf of pollinators. You can write letters, you can, you know, form societies, you can gather with your neighbors and sort of say, this is how we want pollinators to be attracted, and this is what sort of with the pesticide use, and you can really form that community that helps support them in our society.
And it's a great time because there's a lot of awareness, a lot of interest, and a lot of resources out there. Perhaps when you send your follow-up email, I can include book titles, because there's a lot of great books coming out now, how to support our pollinators. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Sarah, for sharing so much wonderful information on pollinators and gardening today. For those, as Sarah was saying, if you're interested, I'll be sending out a follow-up survey for everyone who signed up online. If you haven't yet registered, please, the link is still active. You're welcome to register, and you'll get that through the email. I'll be sending it all out today, along with the link to today's event on YouTube, which you can rewatch. So if there's like, I think Sarah talked about that, but I forgot to write it down, no worries. You can watch the video and speed ahead to the section that you're interested in. So thank you again for everyone who joined us online today. Through YouTube or here on the Zoom meeting. Thank you to Sarah for such a wonderful presentation. We hope you will all join us again soon for another event with the Canadian Wildlife Federation. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.